Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the 85th Emerging Growth Conference and day one of our two-day virtual investor conference. I'm Anna Berry. All right, just a few notes. Today we're going until 4:30 Eastern time, and when we switch to the next company, you'll see a black screen for a moment. Don't go anywhere. That's just us moving over to the next presenter. But if you do experience downtime, refresh your browser. And our platform does work best on Google Chrome. So if you're watching from an Apple device, you have to hit the play button to start the session. Now, during each company's presentation, you can submit questions through the webcast module, and the presenters will attempt to address as many of these at the end of their presentation. And remember, all of our conferences are uploaded to the Emerging Growth Conference YouTube channel, so please subscribe, youtube.com/Emerging Growth Conference. Happy to kick our conference off today with Immuron Limited. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol IMRN. It's a biopharmaceutical company focused on developing and commercializing orally delivered targeted polyclonal antibodies for the treatment of infectious diseases. Today, we are welcoming its CEO, Steve Lydeamore, and Steve has 30 years of international pharmaceutical experience working in Australia, Canada, and the US. He brings valuable international experience, having spent 11 years working at Canadian global pharmaceutical company Apotex Inc., 4 years at Maine Pharma in the US. And this includes valuable experience in mergers and acquisitions, finance, business development, sales and marketing, manufacturing, and research and development. Welcome back to the conference, Steve. Thank you for staying up late. I know you're halfway across the world than we are, at least. So welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, and to those Australian shareholders that are up this late, good evening to you. So let's get into it, and I'm first cab off the rank, and hopefully I can excite you with what we have in store. So quick safe harbour statement here. The financial year 2025 results that are shown in here are currently under audit review, so they're subject to audit. For those of you that are not familiar with the company, as mentioned, we're based in Melbourne, Australia, and we focus on gut-mediated diseases with a platform technology based around developing proprietary vaccines. We use those vaccines to vaccinate dairy cows to produce hyper-immunised bovine colostrum, which becomes the drug substance. And the good thing is, while we have a number of clinical programs, and I'll talk about those, we have two commercial products on the market, one which is available in Australia and Canada and the US market. And it's an opportunity for people interested in the company's technology and to see how it works and try it for themselves. It's for prevention of traveller's diarrhea, and for those that travel to high-risk regions, it's something that should check out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The three clinical programs, so that Travelan product is in 2 clinical trials. We've completed a phase 2 clinical trial in collaboration with the US Navy. So that's the Naval Medical Research Command. It was a controlled human infection model study in 60 subjects. We sent the data for that trial to the FDA in January, and we're waiting on the results of the next trial for Travelan, which is being run by another military institution, the Uniformed Services University. This is a field study, much larger, in actual subjects being US and UK military personnel. They were targeting 866 subjects. They have completed that trial now, so 851 subjects completed, currently going through quality review and data analysis. And we have a near-term milestone coming up with top-line data expected for that in October. And following that, we plan to request the end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA for that phase 2 study that I mentioned for Travelan to discuss protocols for moving into phase 3. So exciting time for the company and moving that program forward. The other clinical asset, which is in the clinical phase, is IMM529 for Clostridioides difficile infection, or C. diff for short. We submitted a pre-IND to the FDA, got positive feedback, and we have a substantially complete IND currently going through quality review by our regulatory consultants. Aim is to submit that to the FDA by the end of September, another near-term milestone, with a view to we're estimating somewhere around the end of December of this calendar year that we may get IND approval, which would allow us in the next calendar year to move into phase 2 clinical studies. So that's quite exciting for us. And I'll be remiss not to talk about Travelan. We are selling it, as I mentioned, in Australia, in the US and in Canada. And we just completed our financial year. So our financial year ends in June. We had sales of $7.3 million, up some 49% on the prior year. And Australia is the largest proportion of that, and it's growing strongly. But what was even more interesting for us is getting growth in the North American markets of US and Canada, much larger population, so much larger potential sales, and they were up 76% on the prior year. We continue to evaluate options to move into new international markets with Travelan. We're also looking to bring in third-party assets for us to market within our sales channels. And we have added one product since I last spoke at Emerging Growth. It's a product for irritable bowel syndrome, pro-IBS. And we have ordered that product. We're expecting delivery of it in the third quarter of this calendar year. And we will launch it in the first quarter of next calendar year. But we're trying really hard to see if we can launch it before that Christmas break. Just quickly on the major shareholders there, we don't have any substantial shareholders. BMY Mellon that's shown here is the holder of the NASDAQ shares. So we're dual listed. I'm IMC on the Australian Stock Exchange and IMRN on NASDAQ. 42% of our stock trades on NASDAQ at present and the balance on the Australian Stock Exchange. No substantial shareholders. There's a couple of Australian shareholders, one of which is owned by former directors of the company, that's Grand Lodge, and management and board are the next largest shareholder. So let's just move into the next slide here. I last spoke at Emerging Growth on the 18th of February, and for those that are returning to listen for an update on Imuron, I thought I'd give you a comparison. So I was quite excited last time when I presented because we had sales growth up 70% on the prior quarter. You can see the numbers there, but you can see we've continued to grow off a strong base, and pictures maybe speak better than words on this. So I have another slide which shows a graph that shows some exciting growth for Travelan sales. The other numbers here I've talked to briefly, but let's just repeat them because they're near-term milestones coming up. So that's the Uniformed Services University Travelan trial data, 851 patients. Top-line data expected in October. Upon those results, we'll look at requesting the end of phase 2 meeting for the Travelan phase 2, looking to move into phase 3 on that one. IMM529 for Clostridial difficile infection, or C. diff. End of September, we're targeting filing of that IND submission with approval targeted for December 2025. And I mentioned their pro-IBS, looking to launch that no later than the first quarter of next calendar year. One project I haven't mentioned yet is IMM986, which is a new development in collaboration with Monash University here in Australia, targeting vancomycin-resistant enterococci, which is a major AMR problem. And they've developed a vaccine. We've vaccinated the cows and produced colostrum. They're in the midst of developing in vitro methods with a view to moving into preclinical animal studies. So that's moving ahead quite nicely. Let's move into the next slide here. All right. For those that have seen this before, I apologise, but for new viewers, just a bit of background on the traveller's diarrhoea market, which we target with Travelan. So it is $1 billion market. It's largely, at the moment, products which are used for treating traveller's diarrhoea after you get it. So think loperamide, which is a generic name, or brand names like Imodium. It's an anti-motility drug, stops bowel movements. There are oral rehydration salts and pain meds and things like that are used. So it's a very large market. We're looking to convert that market of treating something after you get it to a preventative, which is where Travelan works. So we have clinical trials that show up to 90% protective efficacy. And in an environment now that the pandemic's sort of largely behind us, people are traveling and certainly to these high-risk regions that the CDC, so the Centers for Disease Control, suggests that anywhere between 30 and 70% of travellers should expect to experience traveller's diarrhoea. So large opportunity for Travelan. I mentioned the proprietary vaccine. So for Travelan, we're targeting a terotoxigenic E. coli, which is the primary bacteria which causes traveller's diarrhoea. And we have 13 different strains in 2 different vaccines that we produce, that we use to produce the colostrum for this product. How does it work? Quite simply, it binds and neutralizes to prevent, and that's our key point of difference. So whilst it is colostrum based and colostrum is good for you, colostrum products on the market don't have these anti-E. coli antibodies produced using this hyper-immunized technology that we have. So that's our key point of difference there. And we have clinical studies to show that it works. This graph really excites me, and I have spoken to these numbers already. So the numbers are big percentages, but what's really important to focus on here is if you have a look at the financial year 2024, that's the darker line down the bottom there. It's growing quite strongly, but what's even more impressive is the financial year 2025 that we just finished, and sometimes the graph itself shows you more separation there between the 2 lines. So it's growing at a stronger rate than we did last year, so accelerating growth. So we're looking forward to continuing that growth during the financial year 2026, which has just commenced. And this is where we're selling it. So in Australia, you're likely not familiar with these pharmacy groups. So I think Chemist Warehouse there is the largest pharmacy banner group in Australia. It's the equivalent of, say, a US CVS. It's very, very large. Terry White is probably the 2nd largest customer for us on that list. In Canada, unlike Australia, we're selling not only in the retail pharmacy, so Shoppers Drug Mart's the largest pharmacy banner group within the Canadian market. We're also selling in grocery, so Loblaws and Sobeys, for example, which are listed there. And in the US, we made our mark in the US market selling through Passport Health, the US's largest travel clinic chain. And more recently, we've moved into Amazon and Walmart.com. And Amazon.com now is our largest sales channel, and it's growing very strongly. So we're quite happy with the progress in both of those new markets in the US and in Canada. I won't go through this in detail, but in Australia and Canada, where the product has health claims on label, which the Australian TGA and Health Canada allow, we're able to do things that we can't do in the US, and that's to talk about our scientific evidence, the clinical evidence showing up to 90% protectiveness. We have to be more careful how we do that in the US market. We largely do it through social and social media marketing, and also directly on channel within Amazon, for example, to make sure people are aware not only that it's available, but how it works and why you should be considering it. And I do recommend that anyone's interested in Imuron or Travelan or just preventing themselves from getting traveller's diarrhoea when they travel to check out our Amazon website. Lots of good information about the product there. Let's get back to the clinical program. So here's the assets that we have. So Travelan for traveller's diarrhoea in 2 studies. That's the Uniform Services University study that we're looking at top-line data in October. The phase 2 that we completed, funded by MTech in collaboration with the Navy, looking for that end of phase 2 meeting, hopefully early in the first half of next calendar year. The Clostridioides difficile infection asset, moving to that IND submission end of September, looking for approval at the end of December before moving into phase 2 next year. And the vancomycin resistant, or VRE, preclinical program, looking for that in vitro and in vivo preclinical data in the first half of 2026. Now, whilst it's nice to talk about science and clinical studies and things, what does that translate to in terms of dollars is an important question. So we engage the services of Lydeamore Group, a leading life sciences research group in the US, to do both primary research, so talking to prescribing physicians, as well as secondary research to come up with estimated market sizes for both of these assets. So for IMM124E, Travelan, as an FDA-approved drug, we're looking at peak sales in the US market alone of some US 102 million. And for IMM529 for Clostridioides difficile infection, we're looking at US 400 million in the US alone. So good size markets for demonstrating our technology platform's worth and value to the company. Now, the IMM529 is an interesting asset, and Lydeamore considered these events and talked to physicians about it. It's a non-antibiotic, which is important because this is a disease which is both treated with, standard of care is one of two different antibiotics, but also caused by. So people that get treated with an antibiotic quite often get recurrence, and sometimes more than once. And so it's good to have a non-antibiotic. And we also have what we think is the first triple mechanism of action. So we're not only targeting toxin B, which is the primary toxin which is causing C. difficile infection, but also spores and vegetative cells, which are associated with this particular bacteria. And you can see down the bottom there the efficacy data from the clinical animal studies that we did, and I have references at the back of the slide deck that you can read the papers, but you can see all of them are statistically significant and in three different things: so prevention, protection, and treatment. So it's got a lot of things going for it, and we're looking in our clinical program that we've discussed with the FDA, looking at a primary treatment option for this particular molecule. Just touching back on the phase 2 results there, you can see protective efficacy, you can see statistical significance in reduction of diarrhea and any severity, and also statistically significant lower adverse events. So good data. Our collaborators in the US military, that's the Navy and the Army, were quite satisfied with these, and this is what we'll be discussing together with that Uniformed Services University trial that I mentioned before with the FDA in the end of phase 2 meeting. And the pathway to phase 3 is that after the end of phase 2 meeting, we're looking at 2 phase 3 trials, each of which will take approximately 2 years in duration, followed by a BLA submission and approval, which is no less than 12 months or so. So we're at least 3 years away from getting to market for that product, but the size of the pie is large. And as you saw before, the Lydeamore estimate, US $102 million in peak sales for this particular product. And that's because, not only because it's approved by the FDA, but we get those on-label claims. We're able to talk to healthcare practitioners, which we're not able to do at the moment. And before I get to the references at the back, I just want to touch again on the key growth drivers. So revenue, Travelan growth, also growth from launching Pro-IBS for irritable bowel syndrome in Australia. We're also looking at launching that at some point in New Zealand, where we have license rights. And on the clinical programs, IMM124E, i.e. Travelan, just again, that top-line data in October for the Uniformed Services University study, into phase 2 meeting that we're requesting, looking to move into phase 3 in 2026. And IMM529 for Clostridioides difficile infection, the FDA IND submission end of September, and end of December, looking at IND approval. And not on this slide, but IMM986 for vancomycin-resistant enterococci, the preclinical asset. We should have those preclinical study results in the first half of next calendar year as well. References are here for your reading. Lots of good stuff here. The trial that I mentioned showing up to 90% effectiveness, the first one here. All of the other studies that we've done showing broad spectrum, not just E-tech or E. coli, but multiple different bacteria covering Vibrio cholera, Salmonella, Shigella, lots of good stuff there for people to read. And One which was really interesting was the monkey study that we did with the army in Asia, showing up to 75% protective efficacy against Shigella, so preventing shigellosis. And that data that I showed before on efficacy in prevention, stopping recurrence and also treatment of Clostridioides difficile infections there for you to read. And so let me just stop on my contact details here. So my direct email and mobile phone number. Happy to take emails or calls from you. And of course, you have the opportunity now to ask questions, and I'd be quite happy to answer them. So back over to you. Thanks, Anna.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. Yes, question from Lisa. Does Amazon have any restrictions on the regions you can sell to?
I think it does, but not. A lot of countries can buy from the US Amazon website. I think Australia is one that it can't. Maybe that's because we sell it here. I think they can even sell into Canada as well. Yeah, you'd have to go on there and check that out for yourself, because I couldn't tell you country by country which ones you can and you can't. But I do know that you can buy from the US Amazon website into multiple countries.
And Tyree asks, are there any advantages for a biotech in Australia versus the US or other regions where approvals are sought after?
One big advantage, and other companies may or may not present on this, is that the Australian government has a tax incentive scheme. So if you do your clinical trial work here, you can get up to 43.5% of that money back through the tax system. So there's financial incentives for doing research here, but we've been doing a lot of our research actually in the US, because two reasons. One, we've been getting funding from the US Department of Defense, and two, not only are we getting funding, we're also getting access to their skill set. So MIDRIP, which is the military infectious diseases research out of Baltimore, Washington, DC, does a lot of infectious disease research, and we are able to utilize our platform technology with their skills in developing vaccines to produce new products. So lots of good reasons to work in the US market, but Australia has some tax advantages.
And Ryder wants you to talk a little bit about your government contracts. You mentioned the military.
Yeah, so the only one open at the moment is I think there was about US $2.4 million was given, split between the US Army and US Navy. They're developing new therapeutics using our platform technology for a range of different bacteria, covering Shigella, Campylobacter, and different strains of E. coli as well, I believe.
And Joy asks, the new IBS product, will that sustain the revenue growth that they've seen thus far, or will that growth be sustained organically?
We plan on continuing Travelan sales growth in of itself. So this is additive to that. So one of the reasons we've been looking at adding different products into our portfolio is that we have an experienced sales and marketing team and a distribution channel that at the moment is being focused all on one product. So why not get economies of scale and leverage those fixed costs for selling another product? So that'll be additive to the growth potential for the company.
And a question asking, should the USU trial prove positive, can you expect Travelan sales to be generated for those participating departments of the USU? And if not, why did USU undertake the trial?
That's a very good question. So we're quite hopeful. So the USU study is going to be, at a minimum, a supportive study in our discussion with the FDA for the end of phase 2 meeting. We will talk to them about whether it can be considered a pivotal phase 3, because it is essentially the same trial design that we've discussed with them before for phase 3. But putting all of that aside in the FDA, if those trial results are positive, there's two key publications that we'll be seeking to get into. One is the Centers for Disease Control. I mentioned them before. They have guidelines for all diseases as to how you prevent them or treat them. We're not in those guidelines at the moment. We would like to be. We're also not in the guidelines for the International Society of Travel Medicine. And so good results from there, could get us into there. That would open up those healthcare practitioners we're not currently targeting. And you would think, although there's no guarantee, that if it does work, that not only the US military, but other militaries around the world might have an interest in making sure that their troops don't get travelers diarrhea when they're deployed. If you go back to all past wars, whether it's Desert Storm or even Vietnam War and other wars, dysentery, diarrhea, travelers diarrhea, whatever you want to call it, has been a big problem. And so that's why they've been investing all this money in doing these studies.
Thank you for that. Ariane asks, is there any upcoming clinical updates expected for this month or later this year, aside from IND? He sees the company has mentioned the IMM 986 clinical expected this month.
Yeah, so just quickly, the IND is for 529 for C. difficile infection. The Uniformed Services University clinical trial, that's IMM 124E, top line data for that's expected in October, so that's not too far away. And the 986 for VREs in preclinical studies, I don't think we'll have any data to report this calendar year. We're looking at the early in the first half of next calendar year.
Perfect. Well, Steve, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers today?
No, look, I know I'm first cab off the rank, and I thank everyone for their time. If you didn't get the opportunity to have your question answered, please feel free. My contact information is here to reach out to me. We're quite excited about applying our technology to developing new infectious diseases, preventative and treatments for things that antibiotics just can't cope with. And at the meantime, we're looking at growing Travelan sales and bringing other products in and growing revenue to help fund our business. So exciting times. Please keep an eye out for us. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. We look forward to seeing you again real soon. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We'll be right back.